Go Niners! It's Alex Cosper with another Riverside Chat on the American River, just a week before the Super Bowl. And in this Super Bowl, the 49ers are back for their 8th appearance. So the San Francisco 49ers, named after the gold rush miners on this American river, makes you wonder why it's not called the Sacramento 49ers. Yeah. Well, of course, this show talks a lot about the American River, its influence on not just local, but state and national and international history. Naturally, I'm going to bring up the topic about the 49ers, how they're named after the gold miners of 1849, and that whole gold rush started not in Sacramento, but it was closer to Sacramento than San Francisco. So there was a statewide gold rush, like in San Diego. I lived there for a while, and they like to celebrate their gold rush down there. In some ways, more than we celebrate our gold rush in Northern California. I mean, there are events, centered around the gold rush and its history, how it led to California becoming the most populated state in the United States. And now it's like one of the biggest economies in the world, not just because of the gold rush. I mean, the gold rush was the catalyst that brought everybody here. But eventually California, became the home of railroads and other big industries, and basically became the biggest state in population by the early 1960s. In fact, the year I was born, 1962. But anyway, so getting back to the 49ers, yeah, Sacramento was closer to the 49ers that we think of historically than San Francisco was. But again, people from all over the world coming to Sacramento and then the Sierra Mountains, they had to come through San Francisco usually. So that's where that's connected. So let's see, we're talking about sports, music, radio, and politics now. All right, sports, still on the 49ers. They're managed by a guy named John Lynch Jr. John Lynch is the son of John Lynch Sr., who interests me in my radio history because he ran a broadcast group at one time called Noble Broadcasting Group, and they owned one of my favorite stations of all time, which was 91X in San Diego. And that was an alternative station, still is. Started in 1983 as an alternative station after they switched from album rock. And they became a legendary station that was responsible for putting a lot of modern rock on the air for the first time. Them and K-Rock, okay, in Los Angeles. So Noble Broadcasting was run by John Lynch. And John Lynch, by the way, went back to football because out of college, he did major in broadcasting at Drake University, based in my mom's hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. He majored in broadcasting, but he also tried out to be a football player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he only lasted something like a few weeks or something because he injured his knee. So then he decided to go into broadcasting. And so for many, many years, he ran 91X in San Diego. And eventually, after he was part owner of that organization. And when the original founder, named Mr. Noble, died, then John Lynch took over that organization. And he expanded the radio chain to like 20 stations. So that included the station in Seattle. I know they consulted that station that went from top 40 to alternative and became kind of the flagship station, talking about the End in Seattle. KNDD. Basically was the flagship station for Nirvana, Pearl Jam, a bunch of those Seattle bands that put alternative radio on the map and made it a big format in the 90s. So that's John Lynch's story. Once again, John Lynch Sr., who ran that organization. He is the father of John Lynch Jr., who is now general manager of the San Francisco 49ers. All right, so now the next topic, politics. Does football have anything to do with politics? Yeah, a lot, but it's buried, it's suppressed. A lot of times sponsorships will align with political forces, and then that kind of comes out in Super Bowl ads, which are the most expensive television ads on earth. So anyway, one of the questions that might arise, and like on Facebook, I've been interviewing radio people and music people, and a lady put a comment on my Facebook post about interviewing radio pros. Why don't you interview a woman from radio? So I mentioned that I interviewed Nicole Sandler, who programmed KSCA, a AAA station in Los Angeles. And she's worked in New York radio. She was also the producer of the famous nationally syndicated Mark and Brian show out of KLOS in Los Angeles. So yes, anyone who's trying to say I'm against women is off the mark. Now, I did grow up, I mentioned my mom earlier, she supported Ronald Reagan and his opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, but that's because my mom was a homemaker. She viewed herself as a professional homemaker, that her job was to raise kids, because that's how she was raised back on a farm. So I believed, I went along with her back then in the 80s when she was against the Equal Rights Amendment. But I learned to rethink the whole thing on my own, using my own brain, realizing that, you know, women do deserve equal pay as men, and that this is a macho-driven society, but not so much anymore. I mean, the 80s was a very macho decade. You could point to lots of stuff, but I just don't like the concept of macho, and I don't like people bragging about it. So that's why I'm not a Trump supporter. Trump is very macho, but he's also a macho elite, just like Joe Biden. Trump tried to align himself with sports and things like that, and so did Rush Limbaugh, but because of his macho behavior, you know, Rush was denied getting ownership of the St. Louis Rams at one point. He was also kicked off ESPN in a way. He did, one of his dreams was to be a sportscaster, and he wound up on ESPN for a week until he started making racial comments about Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Donovan McNabb, saying he wasn't very good from the get-go and the NFL just wants to see a black quarterback. Well, Donovan McNabb led the Eagles to several championship games, like conference championship games, and even appeared in a Super Bowl after Rush said that. He didn't win, but he racked up a lot of good stats. So Donovan McNabb was a great football player, okay? You know, but getting back to the San Francisco 49ers, they've been, you know, run by open-minded people. And then during the 80s, Bill Walsh was their coach, and he was very open-minded. But, you know, football only gets so open-minded. People might ask, well, how come the 49ers don't hire a woman as general manager or have women on their team? And that gets to be a ridiculous argument, and I notice women never bring that argument up. I'm only bringing it up as a point that women are different from men, and that you can argue all you want about women's rights, but in certain areas, you're not going to get the equality that should be there according to someone who thinks everything should be equal. There are women's football leagues, and sports, including football, can be regulated in such a way that it works for anyone. Like a year ago, I posted a video on YouTube about 3-player football. I invented a bunch of new rules for football that allows for women to play. It's like a no-touch game. So that would make it equal in a sense that you can't tackle a woman. And in fact, there's no tackling in the game at all, the 3-player football game I invented. So there you have it. I definitely support women and women's rights. I probably know more about the history of it than most people. Like 1920 was women's suffrage, where they gained the right to vote. 1973 was the Roe versus Wade issue, in which women's choice regarding abortion was supported by the Supreme Court. So we covered a lot today. Let's see, sports, politics, music, radio. I'm just trying to get my background in there so that you know where I'm coming from. And to let you know, yes, I have not interviewed many women because as far as radio pros, because men dominate that industry. Same way men have a monopoly on NFL football. And I don't expect women to enter the game anytime soon, but at some point they might soften up the rules to allow women. But, you know, physically, men tend to be bigger than women. Just if you look at the overall stats, I actually am closer to a woman's physical build than a man on average, because I'm 5'7", I weigh like 120 pounds. Okay, so I'm discriminated against in NFL football. They're never going to let me play on that team, partly because of my age. But, you know, I've always been this size since high school, so they were never going to draft me. So you see, certain other people are discriminated against, but then that's how they want football to be, this macho, aggressive sport. And it kind of goes along with the military-industrial complex and all that stuff that is embedded in our culture. So I can't change everything, but yes, I can start to interview radio pros, women in the radio industry, but keep in mind that it's something like 70% of people in radio are men, and at the management level, it's closer to 90%. And that's kind of like the banking industry on Wall Street. And I don't necessarily support that. I'd love to see more women involved in management. And so, yeah, there's plenty of women I'd like to interview. I'd also like to interview football players. I myself have worked for an NFL champion who just happened to be a male because he played in the first 2 Super Bowls. His name was Willie Davis. Like, after I worked at Quad in the 90s as program director and midday host, I was hired by Willie Davis of the Green Bay Packers to run his radio station in Milwaukee called WLUM, also known as New Rock 1021. And I was there from 1997 to 1998. I was working directly for Willie Davis, who was based in California. And he introduced me to Walter Payton, NFL superstar legend. And Willie played under coach Vince Lombardi, who's legendary, one of the most legendary winners of all time. So yeah, when the 49ers played the Packers a few weeks ago to advance to the NFC Conference Championship, I was for either team, and I still am for either team in the Super Bowl, San Francisco or KC. My brothers moved to Kansas City area a few years ago, and so I'm happy for them that they've gone to some Chiefs games. I myself have mostly lived in Northern California most of my life, and I've gone to many 49er games, including with my brothers. So that wraps it up, how it all intertwines. And I'd like to talk more about these issues in a future Riverside Chat on the American River for SacTV.com.